begun.
Arms, hands, fingers, lots of hair. Oh my god. Oh my god. It's finally a ginger. Oh, something I'm forgetting. Where were we?
Hi, this is Steve from PixelBump.com. Welcome to our new tutorial on recreating the Regeneration effect from Doctor Who. After last week's tutorial where I compared Renderman and Arnold, I thought I'd do something a little less controversial this week, like, turn the most beloved character in sci-fi into a woman. Something that nobody would find any problems with. And seeing as last week was the 10th anniversary of the new Doctor Who, I thought this would be a really fun effect to explore. And as usual, when you're trying to recreate an effect that already exists, it's really good to take a look at the source material. And fortunately, there's a lot of source material to look at. Starting with the 9th Doctor turning into the 10th Doctor. And here you can see, this is very 2005 kind of After Effects work. It's a particle system with some vector blur, it looks like, and some glows added on. But this really sets the stage for the look of the effect from here on out. And it's really just gotten better each time they've done it. When we look at the regeneration of the next Doctor into Matt Smith, you'll see we start to get a precursor glowing of the skin. You can see that we've got kind of wave lines of a heat distortion coming off of the face and the hands. And then the full-on explosion into the regeneration, where the particles are now feeling a lot faster and more almost like a giant hose of water just bursting off. But as the effect has passed from artist to artist and the technology has improved, the effect itself has changed again and again, just refining that look, improving it, trying to make it more impressive each time. And here you can see there's a much smoother effect that's happening. On the large burst, it feels less particular. All the way up to the most recent regeneration. Here we go. We can start to see that the new look effect, a more organic liquid effect added in with the particle geysers. So I'm going to go ahead and pick and choose the elements that I like the most, that I think work best, and that we can recreate. Now, this is going to be split into 2 weeks. This week we're going to do it all in After Effects. So if you're not a big 3D person, you'll still be able to pull this effect off. But next week, we're going to go into the advanced version, use 3D particle systems in Krakatoa to really amp up the look. So let's get started. Here we've got our first shot, and we can see that our Doctor gets right up to the moment of regeneration. So we're going to be able to do a little bit of that face discoloration, the glowing effect, the heat distortion, and then into the big explosion. And then in our second shot, we're going to do the classic pullback effect, which I think has been in every single regeneration of the last 10 years. This kind of big pullback craning shot. So let's start off. Now, I've got a few things already set up here, so you don't have to watch me construct the entire scene. I've got my TARDIS set, I've got my actor keyed out, I've even got a little mask for the head so that I can have particles coming out in front of and behind the shirt collar. And I've even got a little camera shake set up with our PB Real Camera Shake script, just to add a little bit more impact to the final shot. So to begin, we need to kind of isolate the skin here. So I'm going to duplicate my main footage. We've got Adam without his background, so I'm going to pre-comp this, and I'm going to call this shot 05 isolated. And I'm going to go ahead and grab key light. And I'm going to drop it on that footage. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and key Adam's skin tone. Now, initially, we get kind of a really weird result here where the skin we want is actually been keyed out and everything else is kind of remaining. But what we can do is come down here. Our clip white is dropped all the way down to 0, and we can start bringing back that clip black, and you can see we're starting to get those skin tones back in. And we just kind of want to find a nice balancing point there. Somewhere around 50 looks pretty good. That gives us enough skin detail to work with. The only issue is because there's a lot of red in the skin that we're keying and the bow tie is red, we're going to have to take care of that as well. But that's going to be fairly easy. I'm going to come down here and just mask around the bow tie. And I'm going to take my mask, make it a subtract mask, and I'm going to set my first keyframe. I'm going to come along here maybe every 10 or so and just kind of reposition. Just make sure that I've got I'll just turn my mask to none so I can see a little easier what I'm doing. I'll just kind of keep making sure that I'm getting rid of that bow tie. So somewhere around here it gets a little trickier, but at this point we don't really need to worry about it too much because as you can see I've set 2 markers here that are letting us know when the big effect starts. And about the time the bow tie gets difficult to deal with, we're going to be in that secondary effect. So I'm not too worried about that. So let's just make sure we've got it nice and clean here for the beginning. That's looking pretty good. All right, now got a couple keyframes here where we should fix. There we go. All right, so that's going to work pretty well. Like I said, about this point, we're going to turn the first effect off anyway. So now that we've got that, I'm going to go ahead and pre-comp again. And I'm going to call this the shot 5 skin. And I'm going to move everything in this time. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to make sure that this is hooked back up to my camera shake like everything else. So now if I jump in here and I take a look at the footage, you can see we've got a really nice black and white matte. So I'm going to make a fractal, and I'm going to make a fractal noise, drop it on my fractal layer, and I'm going to change it over to smeary. There we go. Kind of has a nice little organic look to it. And I'm going to put my footage on top, and I'm going to stencil the luma. So only areas that are in the white are going to start showing up. So now I can come back to my fractal, and I'm going to increase the contrast on it, and I'm going to take down the scale until it feels a little more veiny like. And let's see, I'm going to bring down the brightness a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to add a little animation to it. So I'm going to click on the offset and click on the evolution and set keyframes. And I'm going to come to the end. And I'm going to move up in the offset. And I'm going to give it a good full rotation on the evolution. There we go. That might be too fast. Yeah, that's a little too fast on the offset. So let's maybe go half of that. There we go. That'll look pretty good. And let's just trim that layer back. And now that we've got that set up, I can turn that back in, and we've got a very, very strange looking comp. But what I can do with that is come in here and grab a glow. And I'll toss my glow on, and I'm going to change the colors to be some oranges and yellows here. A little brighter yellow, there we go. And I'm going to bring my threshold down until it starts showing through. And I'll bring up the radius a little bit. I don't want to go too high on this first one. And I'm going to set the mode to screen. And then I'm going to grab a fast blur, and I'm going to kind of blur over the top of it. And then I can go ahead and bring my opacity down a touch so it's not too intense. Not looking for anything over the top. There's going to be a lot of different layers here. So each one should be subtle on its own. There we go. So that gives us a nice little glowing of the skin happening. And it's happening in different areas, so it's a little more interesting to look at. Now, let's go ahead and duplicate this layer, and let's get rid of the effects on it. And I'm going to grab Shine. And let's go ahead and turn the opacity back up to start. And let's come into the colors, and let's change that red to maybe a dark orange instead. Bring this down to a little bit lighter orange. There we go. And we will grab our source point, and let's move it just about to where the chin is. So that way we've got all this light kind of coming up and off the face. And let's go ahead and boost it a little bit. Not too much. And let's go ahead and raise a little longer. There we go. Now, this is a pretty cool kind of radial light effect, but you can see it's not really moving with him. But I got a neat way to fix that. So instead of animating the source point, I've got a tracker here set up. And you can see it's kind of tracked to the bow tie. And if I take my shine source point and I bring it over to the position on my tracker, you're going to see that it's going to move with him a lot better. But it's brought our source point down here to where the tie was, not here where the chin was, which is giving it a little bit of a weird look. So that's an easy fix with a little bit of expression. So I'm going to give myself a little more room to work with here. And I'm going to go ahead and really quickly add a couple of effects here. I'm going to go to an expression control and add a slider control. I'm going to call this one X and call this one Y. And what I'm going to do is come down here, and right now this is set to the transform position, the entire transform position, both the X and Y. But we can take this and say our X is equal to transform position and then bracket 0, and that's our first number, that X number. And then we can grab this whole thing and say our Y is equal to bracket 1, and 1 is equal to that number. If you had a third dimension, if this was a 3D layer, you could have 0, 1, and 2, but we're sticking with 2D for now. And then I'm going to go bracket X comma Y. And there we go. Nothing has changed, which is totally fine, because what we're going to do is say, I need to knock this over a bit, so I'm going to need to subtract from that X number. So if I say X, and I put a parentheses around it, minus our X here, and we'll put parentheses around the Y. And we will say that the Y probably needs to be subtracted as well. So we'll go ahead and say minus Y. Make sure we have our end parentheses. And again, still nothing has changed, but we haven't gotten an error, and that's an important thing. But now what I can do is I can start manipulating this with these sliders. So I can have nice, quick visual feedback until I've got it about where I want. And the great thing is that we can keyframe these. So if I cycle through here and I find I want to offset a little more over the course of the shot because the chin isn't moving exactly where that bow tie was, I can do that. So here, this chin dipped way down, and I can still come in and make sure everything is exactly where I want it to be. There, and we'll bring this up a bit. There we go. So now if we go ahead and preview that, we're going to see that source point is going to stick a lot better exactly where we want it to be. There we go. All right. So I think this is a little too heavy right now. I'm going to bring down the ray length and maybe bring down the boost a little bit. And those are nice ray lights, but they don't really have the feeling of heat distortion. So I'm going to grab a turbulent displace, drop it at the end, and I'll go ahead and bring the size down to something I feel is a little better. Maybe about 50. And let's bring up the amount of distortion just a little bit. And we'll go ahead, come back to the beginning. We'll click on our evolution, and over the course of the whole thing, we will give it a full turn again. And that should give us a much nicer heat distortion effect that you can see happening. And it feels like it's wrapping a bit more around his face because we've got that bend to it. So that's pretty good. So we've got some nice glowing skin. We've got some heat distortion coming off of the skin. So far, we're looking pretty sharp. But we can still take this a little bit further because I would really like to have some small particles coming off the skin as well. I think that really helps tie the whole thing together. So I'm going to go ahead, create a particular layer. And I'm going to go ahead and put it on top. And I'll grab my particular effect. And we'll drop that guy on there. And what I need to do is come down to one of my two skin layers here. And I'll just go ahead and grab this one. So what I need to do is duplicate my skin layer one more time. And I'm going to call this one particular. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it to a 3D layer, and I'm going to remove all the effects, and I'm going to turn it off. Because what I want to do is come down to the emitter and turn that to a layer. And emitter layers have to be 3D for particular to use them. So if I come down here and I grab skin particular, and there we go, we've got the layer hooked up. Now I've got a choice here. I can use the color from the layer to drive the particles. In this case, I don't want to do that. I'm going to set that myself. And I'm going to go ahead and start really cranking up this number a bit. And here we go. Okay, so now we've got it moved over. We've got some particles, but they don't look quite right yet. So I want to go down and change some of the settings here. The first setting I think I need to change is the lifespan. They're probably going to be living too long at 3 seconds, so we'll drop that down. But we'll give it a little bit of random. And we'll go ahead and drop the size down to something fairly small, maybe 1.5. And again, maybe just a very small amount of randomization there. For the opacity over life, we'll go ahead and do this fade in, fade out. And we'll set the color be something nice and bright yellow. There we go. And we'll do an additive transfer mode. So that way if the particles start doubling up, they'll get brighter and therefore look a little more energy hot. I'm going to come down to the physics, and I'm going to open up until I get to where my wind is. And I'm going to push the wind up. So let's say maybe negative 250. Let's see, there we go. So you can see they're coming up and looking pretty cool. I really don't like the look of those yet. So I'm going to come down to my turbulence, and I'm going to affect the position. And I'm going to set this a little bit high, maybe 300. Then I can play with my scale a little bit here and maybe go to 15, just so I get a little bit more of that effect apparent. So with that all in place, I can look at it and say, that's looking pretty close to the motion that I like. Maybe I'm going to turn down the velocity just a little bit, so that way it's more of the wind pushing them than their own trajectory. That looks pretty good. And now I'm going to take it up a bit. Lots of particles. As now I'm going to be able to really see what this looks like. And I think maybe I'm going to want to bring that back, my scale back down a little bit. I want more separation areas. So maybe try 8. Nah, it's too small. There we go, maybe 9. There we go. That way we get some very dense areas and some very light areas in here. And if we bring it back over the top, we can set that to a screen mode. And they don't look great right now because they're just little dots. And particles rarely look good without motion blur. So let's go ahead and add some to that. And this is something that you really want to do very close to the end, once you've really kind of got your particles set, because this is really going to start slowing things down. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my motion blur. And the linear motion blur itself, you know, it doesn't look as good as it could. So I'm going to come down here and go to subframe sample. And you're going to see instantly we're getting a much nicer particle look here. A lot softer and a lot more interesting. But it is fairly render intensive. So we want to be careful, make sure that it's pretty close to the end of setting our particle look. We go ahead and turn that back on. You can see the particles themselves like a really nice fun energy. And that's pretty good for that initial effect. So I think I'm pretty happy with what we've got here so far, but now we need to start building a transition to bring us into the big geyser of particles that are to come. And when you're looking for something to be a nice flash of light, there's really not much better than optical flares. So I'm going to go ahead and create an optical flare layer. And I'm going to grab the plugin. And I'm going to drop it on. And I'm going to come in and change my flare a bit. Let's go ahead and just get rid of all this irising. I really don't want any of that irising. I'm going to bring up the glow size here, and I'm going to bring down my spike ball here and bring down my glint. There we go. Something a little softer like that. And I'm going to change my aspect ratio and make it a bit wider than it is tall. Okay. Now if I go ahead and screen that guy, I can kind of knock him into place here. And I can change that color to be more of an orange. There we go. And maybe not quite that bright and intense. Let's bring it on top there. There we go. And again, we've got a nice little radial light here at the bottom, but we don't have it moving with our actor, but that's not a problem because we've already got the solution. So I'm going to come back to my shine layer. I'm going to come down to the effect, and I'm going to go ahead and steal those two, my X and Y, and I'm going to add it to the optical flare layer. And then I'm going to come down to the shine, and I'm going to grab this expression, and I'm going to go to the XY position of my optical flare, and I'm going to paste that position expression in. So now, once again, we've got it all set up. And if I come down here, we're probably going to have that flare come in about there, so I'll get rid of the first couple keyframes. And let's start seeing how it's working. So I don't want it to go up as high with the chin, so I'll go ahead and bring it down a bit. And here we'll go ahead and bring it over, leave it about where it is. Let's see, by the end, that's looking pretty good. And it looks like it holds pretty well for the rest. So let's go ahead and see what we've got. That's good, but it just kind of blinks on. So we'll go ahead and take our brightness, go down to 0, over a couple of frames. We'll go ahead, bring it up to maybe 125, something really bright. And then over a number of frames, we'll bring it back down to about 50 where we liked it before. So we get a nice flash. There we go. And let's go ahead, take that optical flare, we're going to duplicate it and put it underneath our keyed layer. So we have a double brightness happening. There we go. That's looking pretty smart. And the next thing we need to do is start building our geyser of particles. Let's go ahead and start with our first frame. This is where they're going to start to build. We'll make a new layer. And we'll call this particular head. And we're going to call this the big particles, as this one's going to be really big. And we're going to drop it just underneath our masked layer, just underneath where we can pour them out of the collar of the shirt. And we'll grab a particular layer again, drop it on that layer, and we're going to go ahead and steal our X and Y values here, paste those on, and we're going to go ahead and steal our expression one more time. And having this expression just really makes a lot of this a lot faster and a lot easier to use. So I'm going to come down to my X and Y position again, paste in my expression, and there we go. Now we don't want this to be quite from exactly where the neck is here, where the flare is. So we're going to go ahead and isolate it with our footage. And we just want to make sure that our keys, there we go, we want it to be down underneath, inside the shirt, so to speak. So bring that over a bit. All right, looking good. No, not yet, but it will. So let's go ahead and change this from a point to a box, and we're gonna go ahead and change it from a uniform direction to directional. And I'm gonna go ahead and spin up 90 degrees so they're shooting straight out. And let's see here, let's go ahead and manipulate our center point here a little bit. I want to make sure they're always coming out of the center of the neck as much as possible. Now here we can go ahead and increase our direction a little bit, but we really want to bring up our velocity. We want these guys to move fast, like maybe 1,000. If I go ahead and preview that, nope, Think faster than that. Let's go 1500. Maybe 1750. Want a lot of speed on these guys. There we go. And let's go ahead and widen our particles out here in the X, so that way it's coming fully out of the neck hole. And let's go ahead and bring up our particle amount. We're going to need a lot more. Let's just start it off at 10,000. Probably going to go much higher than that, but that's a good place to start. And seeing them all together, I'm going to go ahead and shrink that directional spread back down to 25. Now let's go ahead and fix our particle look. Now we're not going to need them to live very long at all, because this is particles moving really, really fast, and the faster we kill them off, the easier it will be on After Effects to keep rendering. So let's maybe go with 0.4. That way we make sure they're going to be off of the screen. And let's go ahead and set a keyframe here for our particles. We'll move that 10,000 over to in line with our number 2 marker. And down here, we'll just go to 0. So there we go. We got a huge torrent of particles bursting out. And let's come back and fix our size. Again, we're going to want to go pretty small with these. And we can give these a lot more randomization of size. Opacity over life, we don't have to worry about this time, but we do want to change the particle color. Again, something in that yellowish orangish range. And again, let's go ahead and add a additive transfer mode. And then we're going to come back down to our physics, and we're going to go ahead and add some turbulence to these as well. Let's go ahead and crank up our turbulence until we can see it affecting it. We're going to have to go a lot higher on our turbulence this time because the particles are moving a lot faster. And somewhere around 800, we can start to see the effect I'm looking for. Let's see. No, let's go ahead and leave the scale where it is this time. But we're going to come down here and we're going to change our Y offset. I'm going to go ahead and keyframe at the beginning and then at the end. Let's see, we want to go in a negative direction, it seems like. So let's go like negative 1,000. So that way it doesn't look static, that the particles will just kind of be moving in the same pattern over and over again. It'll keep them moving in interesting ways. All right, so maybe that spread is still too much. I'm going to drop that back down to 20. Should have left it where it was. There we go. So now I want to come back and I'm going to go down to my rendering. We're going to add motion blur again. But this time, I don't think we're going to need that subframe. We want more of this. And I don't want it to be that heavy. Maybe something around 180. There we go. And let's go ahead and crank up our particles. Now that we've got our motion blur, let's go 10 times higher with our particle amount. Just an unbelievably large amount of particles. There we go. We're starting to really put a little hurt on After Effects. All right, so let's go ahead and see how fast those are moving, see if that's looking pretty good. All right, so now we have a stylistic choice to make. I like them being particles like this, but if you want to have more of that kind of gaseous look that we saw in some of the other examples, you want to go ahead and grab your vector blur, throw it onto your particular layer, and start bringing up the amount. Let's see, let's find, oops, there is maybe something like perpendicular, and you can start fading that out a lot more. It really just depends on the kind of look that you want for your effect. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back off, but that's how you can get a more gaseous look here in After Effects with your particular layer. But I'm pretty happy with that. I think maybe I'd like to see a little more in the speed. So I'm going to go ahead and up the velocity all the way to 2,000. So I just really want those things to crank a little faster. There we go, that's looking better. I like that more. Now I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that first layer. And I'm going to come down here, I'm going to change the random seed. So I don't want them to be exactly the same. I'm going to look for its keyframes here, and instead of a huge amount of particles, instead of 100,000, I'm going to bring this one down to just 1,000. And then I'm going to come down to the particle look. I'm going to change it to a glow sphere. I'm going to go ahead and give it a little more size. And I'm going to turn off its motion blur. There we go. Now we've got some nice little particles there. And if we play it, and if we give it a preview, it just adds a nice extra layer of interest to our particle effect. But we're not quite done yet. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate our original layer one more time. And on this one, I'm going to go ahead and bring the emitter size way back down. So what I want to do is create more of a core here, more of a central area of interest. And again, I'll go ahead and change the random so it's a little different. There we go. Now if I go ahead and unsolo all those layers, we should be getting a pretty interesting effect happening here. And now we can start tuning. So we can see it's not quite wide enough. Maybe I was not quite wide enough. There's two ways we can fix that. Either we can come down here and try to just widen it out, see if that looks okay, which I think that does. But I think we also are going to need more particles. And so I'm going to go ahead and add another 50,000. And let's go ahead and see how that looks as a preview. And that looks pretty good. But the last thing I want to do, I think, is add a little more light to these guys. So I'm going to add a glow over the top of my particles. And I'm going to go ahead and, again, I'm going to change my colors, be a little more in line with what I'm going for. Change it over to the A and B colors. And I'm just going to solo this for a second. Bring my threshold down a little bit and bring up my radius quite a bit. Maybe bring that at 1.5, maybe somewhere in the middle there. There we go. There we go. Now we're really starting to see the kind of geyser effect that we're looking for. Looks like I have a secondary keyframe there for my particles, where they turn off. Don't want that. I better check my layers here, make sure I'm not turning all of my nice particles off way before I want them to turn off. All right, that looks good. And there we go. Now we've got that nice big geyser continuing. All right. So I think the other thing I want to do is come here and add some flicker to my optical flares. And I'll go with the 20 and 20 on the first one, and we'll go 20 and 20 on that one, and I'm going to just change the random seed on it so they're not the same. Now I think we're probably pretty close on this effect, so I'm going to jump back to the beginning. And I think we've got our, let's go ahead and turn our shine layer on over the course of the shot. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab its opacity, and over the first 20-30 frames, just kind of bring it up so that way this reveals in layers. And let's go ahead and preview that and see if there's any more tweaks we want to make. All right, that is looking excellent to me. I'm pretty happy with that. The only thing we're really missing at this point is something from the most recent version of the effect, which is some of that more organic liquid effect. So to solve that, I'm actually just going to grab some elements from the blood pack. The blood pack is our stock pack here at PixelBump.com, and it's for digital blood squibs and misting. But it's a little more flexible than that because it really is a nice amount of fun liquid that kind of bursts out. So you can use it in all sorts of different ways. Like here, I'm going to go ahead and grab from our selection of up-angled blood hits, and I'm going to grab one of the mists. And I'm going to take that, and I'm going to make sure it's below the collar here. And I'm going to speed it up. All of them have been rendered slow motion, so it's just a good idea to make them go a little faster. And if we see here, we've just got this nice little, we've got a really nice burst out of blood that goes up and then falls back down. So if we rotate it 90 degrees, we'll see, there we go. So we've got this nice little volcano eruption. So what we want to do now is grab a tint, drop that tint onto it, and we're going to remap the colors to be yellow and orange right there in our color family. And while we're here, let's go ahead and grab a glow and drop that underneath. And we'll change those colors as well to be closer to what we want. A and B. And we will change it from original to AB colors. We'll pull the threshold down a little bit and bring out our glow radius just a tad. Just kind of tune it until it feels a little more like that organic liquid that we saw in the example. So now I can take it and I can position it so that it comes out the neck area. There we go. That's more interesting. And I'm going to go ahead and just attach it to my tracker. So now I've got a nice extra effect, and I'm going to go ahead and make a second one by duplicating my first layer, and I'm going to grab a second blood effect. Let's go ahead and make sure that this one also is going to come out about the right area. So this one we need to move over a little bit. There we go, and that's just going to give us another layer of fun particliness. So let's go ahead and preview this whole thing and see if we're good. And that is looking pretty sharp to me. I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. And it's just the layering of the particles and the layering of the effects is what I think is really making this work. It's just got a lot more interest going on, a lot more things to look at and take in. So the great thing about this kind of a setup is once you've got it set up, it's really easy to transfer it to other layers. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my big particle layer for the head, and let's jump over to shot 6. This is the big pullback shot. And if I go ahead and drop it in just above my footage, first it's going to complain that our expression is gone, and that is true. So let's go ahead, come down to where we have our emitter, and we're going to go to our expression, and we're just going to turn that off. We don't need it anymore. And we're going to go ahead and bring up our pre-run. And we're going to take our particle amount, turn off those keyframes, and just start bringing this up till we can see what we're working with. and we can go ahead and bring that emitter size back down. So it starts from a much smaller place. And now all I got to do is position it, give a little bit of rotation, and change a few settings, like the life is a little too long right now. I want it to be a little less than that. Maybe about 1 second. And I want to go ahead and trim back that velocity a little bit. It's going way too fast for this longer shot. That's way too slow. I wanted to go somewhere in the middle here. And I want to come down and crank down my turbulence. Maybe 150 is going to work a little better there. There we go. Let's see how that's working. There we go. Still looking nice and fast. And I'll go ahead and I'm going to attach my particle layer here to my footage so that they will move together. And now I can come up, crank up my number of particles, something like 50,000. There we go. And now I just have to start duplicating it again. So I'm going to go ahead and create that second layer. Again, drop it down to about 1,000. Change it over to glow spheres. Change it over to glow spheres. I'm going to go ahead and change the color a little bit so it'll be easier to differentiate them. And I'm going to come down and turn off my motion blur. There we go. We got those guys back. Now, these ones, we are going to want to change their opacity over the course of the life. So we want to go ahead and give them a nice big soft fade off. So that way they don't just suddenly cut on or off. And let's go ahead and adjust position here a little bit. Stays coming out of the neck area. Our second one looked pretty good, but let's go ahead and change the randomness on it. There we go. And let's go ahead and grab our two elements here from the blood pack, and let's go ahead and attach those as well so we can keep having these fun organic effects happening. And we'll just move that, and we're going to probably want to shrink this guy down at least 50%. There we go. And with this guy, let's go with 50 again. See how that's too big. That's too big for both of them. Too big. Let's drop them down. There we go. Just drop those guys back down. Let's see where this one ended up. And let's rotate it a little bit. And same with this guy. We'll give it same rotation. Just line it back up. And we'll attach these two to our footage layer as well. So now, if I go ahead and preview this, you see we were able to transfer that entire look we set up in the previous shot for a second shot really fast. The only thing needed to do here is recreate 2 more times for the hands, which I will let you do. And let's go ahead and turn on a little bit of our camera shake here so we can just preview this correctly. There you go. Looking good. The next thing you need to do is just add some swelling music and you're good to go. So I think this is where I'm going to leave off this tutorial. I hope you've learned something that you can use in your work, and I hope you'll join us next week when we're going to take this effect, take it up the next level with 3D particles and Krakatoa renders. If you have any questions, you can always hit me up on Twitter or Facebook or on Google Plus or down in the comments. And if you want to keep learning, we have more great tutorials and assets for you to use in your work at PixelBump.com. Thank you so much for watching. Go and create.